You are ready?
I'm ready when you are.
All right.
Just gonna hit the button on the coffee maker.
Are we ready, team?
Good morning, Madam President. Yes, we are, as soon as Mayor Duggan returns.
All right. I am ready to begin. And we can begin. Good morning to everyone. This is your Detroit City Council President, Brenda Jones, the Citizens' Voice, joining you for coffee, tea, water, whatever your favorite beverage is, and conversation. We are also live at facebook.com/CP Brenda Jones. Please post your questions on Facebook or press *9 on your phone during our question and answer session. Last week, or should I say it wasn't last week, I think it was 2 weeks ago when we met, I said, I think summer has finally arrived and it's here for good. Well, let me tell you, it's definitely here. We've had over one consecutive week, I know, of over 90-degree days. Thank goodness. The city has open recreation centers as cooling centers for our most vulnerable citizens. Joining me this morning is Mayor Mike Duggan. On your phone during our question that this is the first time a city council president and a mayor have had a public sit-down one-on-one conversation. Good morning, Mayor Duggan.
Well, good morning. You're more technically advanced than I am, so I'm very pleased to be your guest on this, and I'm fascinated to see how it works.
Yeah, well, we have been Zooming, and we have Zoomed probably over 50 meetings that we have held on Zoom outside of our normal city council meetings. So I'm getting used to this technology as well. I am not that technically savvy, but I'm trying to get there. So the first thing, let's just jump into our conversation because I know you have a very busy schedule today. And the first thing I want to talk about is COVID-19. And so COVID-19, as we all know, it hit the city of Detroit very hard, and it has caused just so much loss to so many lives, and it's caused so much devastation. Despite the uncertain times, you, as the mayor of the city of Detroit, immediately stepped up and led the city of Detroit through this historic pandemic period. First of all, let me commend you on the leadership that you and your team has shown and the commitment to the health, safety, and the economic stability of our Detroit residents. Shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic hit Detroit on March 18, 2020, unfortunately, you had a great loss, and that was the loss of your father, the Honorable Patrick Duggan. Known for being fair, and was known for putting the law first. My first question to you is, how are you doing since that loss?
Well, it's been hard, and everybody who has lost somebody since the COVID crisis hit knows that we couldn't have a funeral. I mean, we had a handful of people just went right to the cemetery for a burial, and so it's a difficult process. But I was with my mother this weekend, and she's doing well, and we're going to participate in the memorial that I know you know that Rochelle Riley is working on, where we're going to celebrate the lives of everybody we lost during this period. And I know she'll have the details, but I think it's going to be the kind of community memorial And I think it'll be good for a lot of us who lost people close to us to be able to have the opportunity to mourn together.
Okay, all right. So, and I say that he was fair. I know someone who actually went to federal prison and said that, believe it or not, Mayor Duggan's father was the one that sent me to federal prison. And they said to me he was fair. And they said to me also that when they wrote him a letter, or even once they got out and they contacted him, he always responded. And so I can say fair because I was told that by someone who was sent to prison by your father. So that's
Well,
why I can easily say that.
he got a lot of national attention. He was the judge who ruled that the University of Michigan could use race as a factor in admissions because of the need for diversity in universities, and his opinion was upheld by the United States Supreme Court 5-4. And so he was appointed to the federal bench by Ronald Reagan, and I think a lot of the conservatives were shocked when he came out so strongly for universities in this country to be able to get the kind of balance that we ought to be having in our institutions of higher education. But that's, he was a lifetime Detroiter, was a part of this city, and but I've been hearing a number of people who've been in front of him.
Lost but not forgotten, gone but not forgotten. So,
thank you.
So as council president, one of my initial biggest challenges when the COVID-19 pandemic happened was to determine how council would continue its budget deliberations while working from home. We were able to successfully implement and continue to have digital meetings for all of our standing committees and also for formal session. What was the greatest challenge being the mayor of Detroit during the pandemic? And what was your greatest challenge during this pandemic? And what have you learned from this COVID-19?
Well, I feel like I was prepared. As you know, I ran the Detroit Medical Center in 2009, when the country geared up for the H1N1 or swine flu epidemic. And our chief operating officer, Hakeem Berry, worked with me at DMC, and he coordinated our efforts on testing and the like. So we felt like this was something that was a subject matter we were familiar with, but it was frightening in late March and April. I got to the point where I just dreaded every time I got a new text message. We had 600 police officers that were on quarantine. We were worried about police and fire and EMS were interacting with citizens. It turned out there was a far greater problem of spread at these roll calls where these officers are shoulder to shoulder in the lunchrooms. And I spent a lot of time on national mayors' calls, warning other mayors in the country that you need to get ahead of this in your police department. New York had the same issue. And then hearing from people at hospitals, we don't have the gowns, we don't have the masks, healthcare workers' lives are at risk. I know 3 people who were sent home from hospitals, all 3 happened to be suburban hospitals, who went in with symptoms, they were so overcrowded, sent home and they died. It's almost indescribable how difficult that 4 or 5 week period was. And when they were building the 1,000 beds over at the TCF Center, the governor's projections showed Detroit was going to need those 1,000 beds. But, I took a position from the beginning that if we did aggressive testing, if we wore masks, if we distanced, that we could make that TCF Center unnecessary. And council was just terrifically supportive. We had council members who came out and worked. I think Roy McAllister and Janae Ayers were out working the fairgrounds in a mask. Nobody knew who they were. They weren't getting any political credit for it. They were just out there day after day moving traffic to do that kind of thing. You and council did a really good job of pushing out the public messaging on this. And of course, we handled the budget situation in a way where we put together differences on other things and we got something done that I think protected the healthcare of every single city employee as we went through this. So it was a great thing to see in late April when the curve leveled off far faster than anybody nationally had predicted. And then we dropped faster than anybody in the country. And so we did some good things at the government level, but the people of this city embraced masks and social distancing in a way that showed they really cared about their neighbors. And really, it was the support of the average person in the city that knocked down COVID in Detroit really faster than any other city in the country.
And as you indicated, it was truly a difficult time for me because I too went, and I think I was talking to you as I was driving to Beaumont saying,
Right.
I'm going to get tested myself. And you asked me what symptoms that I have. And I went to Beaumont, and Beaumont turned me around. Thank God I didn't die. And then just a few days later, I went in the city of Detroit, was tested, and later found out that I tested positive for COVID. And the amazing thing was I tested positive, didn't know I tested with, was going to test positive. And as I indicated, we had set up the digital meetings, and I just continued to work throughout the whole thing. I continued to have Zoom meetings. I talked to the FRC. The FRC allowed me to be able to change the budget cycle so that everyone would be able to stay safe and be able to set up everything at home to be able to work from home. And so it was an interesting thing. And so now we're living in a new reality, and life as we know it will probably never be the same. What do you see as being the biggest change in the city of Detroit?
Well, our economic recovery was making a lot of progress, and I was spending a large part of my day recruiting new companies and new jobs and working with Nicole Sherrod-Freeman in Detroit at work to make sure the Detroiters were filling those jobs. That was probably 50-60% of my time, and that was a really exciting thing. It's enjoyable to go to work when you think we're going to create real opportunities. In now, I don't have to tell you, Livernois, we had 22 Black-owned businesses open on Livernois in the last year. We expected, with all that money we put in the landscaping, that Livernois was going to be packed this summer and going to be a vibrant corridor. And now it's doing okay relative to other corridors, but our businesses, particularly our small businesses, are under enormous pressure. And I'm really concerned. I think a vaccine will be out January, February, March. I think we will get back to something that is closer to what we remember as normal. I just want to make sure when we do, we don't have a bunch of empty storefronts and people whose dreams were wiped out. You're a former business owner. You know that the margins that businesses operate on aren't good in the best of times. And right now, it's really challenging for them.
And so that is important to me, making sure, and I have spent a lot of time on Livernois and 7 Mile with those business owners to ensure. We talked about parking up there, and we had challenges up there, and I want to make sure all of them stay in business. So as I mentioned earlier, a key area where we've seen a change is in digital meetings, employment, and education. I recently introduced a resolution that passed unanimously to support internet access for all Detroit residents. It urges the city of Detroit to partner with corporate entities to develop a network of mobile hotspots and other feasible options to deliver internet access to all of our Detroit households. We know how difficult it was. We had seniors who did not want to go to the store, and so they didn't have internet, so they could not order their food online. We've talked about our census numbers being down because people were staying in. And so what are your thoughts on what we can do or on decreasing the digital divide by implementing partnerships with businesses and corporations to provide hotspots across the city of Detroit?
I support what you're doing 100%. Beth Niblock, our IT director, has been talking about digital divide from the first day she arrived here, and a lot of people's eyes glaze over. They don't really know what you're talking about. But it really became crystal clear in COVID. And I think, and this is a case where COVID is going to do some long-term good. But you saw the first school districts that closed down in the state before the governor issued any order. They were West Bloomfield, they were Grosse Pointe, they were Ann Arbor. They were wealthy districts where Their young people all had laptops. They were used to learning online. They just switched the curriculum right over. In the city of Detroit, not only do a lot of our children not have access to a laptop, a lot of them don't have, as you say, the high-speed internet connection. And so when Reverend Wendell Anthony put out the call to the corporate community, and DTE and Quicken and so many others came forward with $20 million to buy laptops for every single child. But then they realized laptop wasn't going to do any good without connectivity. And so they had to pay for significant internet connectivity. Dan Gilbert has now taken this issue on. He just took the proceeds of this Rocket Mortgage Classic, and the entire amount of it is being donated to reducing the digital divide, because you're right. You think about this, for all of the other obstacles, whether you're a student or an adult, as the world goes more and more online, the inequities get even bigger if you're not connected. And the truth is that the Comcast of the world, it hasn't been profitable in some sections of the city to build out those high-speed connections because they didn't have enough customers. We now have to dig into that, and we got to make sure it's available everywhere. And so I think your leadership on this has been great, and it's something that's going to be really important for Detroit's future.
Well, in considering we have AT&T, Comcast, and Rocket Fiber all right here in the city of Detroit, it seems as though they can all join together at some point and work hand in hand to ensure that all of Detroit have internet access. And then when you're out in the streets as well, you're able to connect as well. And also, there are spots in the streets where you can just hook up your charger and be able to charge, hook up your cord and be able to charge. So as we're talking about COVID impact on Detroit, one of the biggest impacts is the dramatic decrease in our city's revenue, which in turn impacts our economic stability. One way for the city of Detroit to increase our economic stability is to leverage opportunities through the City of Detroit contracts. You know that I constantly advocate for Detroit businesses to get Detroit contracts and to hire Detroiters. If we are able to ensure residents have access to business and employment opportunities on City of Detroit contracts, then we are able to put Detroit residents to work with good paying jobs, and we're able to create multi-million-dollar businesses that employ Detroiters. Both outcomes contribute to our tax base through income and also property taxes, and it helps support our retirees. A non-Detroit business with no Detroiters, to me, is not a feasible investment of our procurement dollars due to the loss in income and the loss in business tax revenue. So can you just talk about what are some of the administration's long-term plans to ensure Detroit's economic stability?
So the leadership that you and other council members have shown on this has been very helpful. And of course, we've got ordinances that give preference to Detroit-based, Detroit headquarter businesses that make a real difference. With your efforts, we're doing things called supply schedules, where we're taking the kinds of services that Detroit companies are likely to be able to provide and bidding them out ahead of time so that those Detroit companies will be able to be ordered from on a regular basis. But some of this is just paying attention to details. So for example, we had a contract for all of the fuel for all the vehicles across the city of Detroit. I don't know what we've got, 2,000 vehicles, police, fire, and the like. And we had one contract, I'm going to say was something like $120 million. And the same person was getting it. Boise Jackson in our procurement department said, what if we broke it up into three $40 million contracts? Would we get more providers? We did that. We got the same price for all three. But as you know, we have the largest Black-owned oil and gas supply public contract in America from a business over on McNichols, who never could have done it if we hadn't broken it up. And so now we're going through and saying it's not enough just to bid this out and give people an opportunity to bid. Sometimes you need to look at the small growing businesses. And so that means, do we really need these bond requirements as high as they are? Can we pay our bills a little bit faster? Because small businesses, they need that cash flow to make their payroll. Are we doing enough outreach? And even if your business is in the suburbs and you're doing business with the city, those individuals are welcome too, but we want to know you're hiring Detroiters. If your business is located in Southfield and you've got 51% Detroiters, I want to support that business because you're supporting our city. If you're located in Brighton and you don't have any Detroiters, then you really need to show us that there is no company that is in the city or close to the city that can't do it for a comparable price. But it is as much about being intentional as it is as having the basic policies. I think Boise Jackson right now is doing a great job, but there is no doubt, Madam President, that your focus on every single question, you have everybody here asking, is this the best way to have put this out for bid? And we know when you're buying buses, there's nobody in the Detroit area buying buses. That contract's not going to go to a Detroiter. But if you're going to repair the buses, that's a different conversation. And these are the kind of approaches we're trying to take.
And as you know, Mayor, you may not know, on every contract we have, those are questions that I ask. I ask how many Detroiters that do you have working with that company? Did you try to do a joint venture? What is your plans on hiring more Detroiters? That's something that I look at, and that's something that I take extremely, it's just something that's very important to me, that we get Detroiters hired. And so in addition to Detroit businesses doing Detroit work, I would also like to see the implementation of a target business and employment strategy. And so this would dictate the contractors who do not meet the 51% Detroit workforce requirement would be obligated to work with the Detroit Employment Solutions Corporation to place qualified Detroiters in position. It would also provide an evaluation of city services to determine employment gaps in order to prepare residents for employment on City of Detroit contracts. I would like to see a review of city contracts to determine where there are gaps in Detroit businesses providing services, and then work to support Detroiters in the development of businesses to provide those services. This, I believe, could be done through targeted outreach and the investment of our Motor City match dollars. What's your thought?
So I agree with you. Detroit at Work has become a huge competitive advantage for the city. What Nicole Sherrard-Freeman has done in basically doing outreach for companies to place Detroiters, we basically forced FCA as part of our agreement to get them the land for that plant to interview Detroiters first. But when they saw what we did with 200 outreach sessions where we said to people, you got to have a high school degree, you're going to have to pass a dexterity test, you're going to have to pass a math test, we're going to give you a sample math test today. If you don't do well, we've got tutoring at churches on nights and weekends. And we are sending this week, they're starting the interviews, but we had more than 3,000 qualified Detroiters for the first 1,500 jobs they're applying for. And FCA said, this is great. You're saving our human relations department the cost of screening these down. Then Dakota came in. It's going to be providing parts at the old Kettering High School site with another 500 jobs. And as we started doing these FCA fairs, 15 different businesses came up and set up tables in the hallway because they wanted access to Detroiters to fill those jobs. And so I think this is something that is gone from my conversation a year ago is you're making us do this. Now, as you know, all the road contractors, all the water and sewer department contractors have to either hire 51% Detroiters or they're going to have to pay into our training fund. At first, they were complaining to me that we were being too tough on them. Now, Detroit at Work has become their best friend because Detroit at Work is supplying them with good qualified people.
And the other thing that has happened is there's been enormous progress in attitudes toward returning citizens. There is a great deal of talent in this city. Individuals who at some point had a criminal record have put that behind them and are doing well. And the success we're having in placing those individuals helping. And Madam President, I make one last point. I just saw yesterday we sent 2 contracts to you that were road contracts that were a Caucasian-owned company. And in both cases, they had joint ventured with an African-American Detroit company on the bid. This is what we want to see. And it's something that 3 or 4 years ago probably would not have happened. But between your efforts and the efforts of Boise Jackson and Ron Brundage and a lot of others, I think we're starting to head the right direction.
Thank you. And you know, myself and my office have a good working relationship with Boise Jackson. I think it's so important that we continue on with that relationship so that we can get businesses in the city of Detroit, African-American businesses. You talk about the business that on 6 Mile, and you know, I talked to that gentleman many years ago when he was trying to be able to do business downtown. And one of the things that I always stress is, you know, doing business downtown is good, doing business in New Center is good, but you have more of community than you have downtown. You have more miles in community than you have downtown, and then you have a New Center. And so it's important that you do business in the community as well. And so what the gentleman concentrated on doing was building up also the northwest side of Detroit.
Right.
And he put a lot of money into the northwest side of Detroit in purchasing things on the northwest side. And then he said, I'm going to bid on something again in the city of Detroit. And, you know, I continue to talk to him and tell him, don't give up, don't give up. There is an opportunity. I will continue to work to ensure that you have and you get that opportunity. And he was able to get the opportunity. And I am so happy and so proud that he was able to get that opportunity. And so I want to move to the topic of business outreach. And it leads me to the similar concept of community outreach. And so we have worked collaboratively to develop the community outreach ordinance to inform residents of various actions and provide an opportunity for residents in the community to be able to comment. This ordinance will outlast me, outlast you, outlast any city council or any mayor. We talked about it during the budgeting cycle when you talked about doing it in a couple of departments, doing the community outreach. And I think it's so important. What have been some of the benefits of community outreach throughout your term as mayor?
Well, it's such an interesting thing. And of course, before COVID hit, I was once a week in a living room in a neighborhood in this city. And it was an outreach of 15, 20 people at a time. But it kept me very well grounded in what was going on in the neighborhoods. But it just always fascinates me. We do press releases, we put things on the cable news, we send out quarterly mailings. And the number, we get, of course, our internet, our website has all the programs on it. The number of times I'm in a meeting and tell somebody about a program, and they said, I never heard about that before. Why don't you publicize it? And this is a town that is very much face-to-face, person-to-person communication town. It just is. And so I think having additional outreach meetings, which means not only the people who come there, but you know what this community is like. Everybody who comes to the meeting will go tell some of their friends what they heard the night before. And so I think the direction there is good, and I'll be glad. I guess it's easier to sit in a room and do Zoom. I prefer to be actually in the neighborhoods and getting a chance to engage back and forth with the community. But I think the more of this we do, the better. And your ordinance basically guarantees that if the administration gets busy in 3 months, we don't stop doing it, because your ordinance requires that it happen all the time. And I think it was really a good idea.
And we have definitely engaged the community through these type of meetings. We've talked about the community outreach ordinance that I'm presenting to, and it's already been presented to my colleagues at the table. We've talked about it just at coffee and conversations for several meetings, engaging the community and getting the community input on how they felt about it and some of the things that they'd like to see. And I thank you for your input and the administration, as well as the law department, who worked extremely hard with helping us get this ordinance in place. And so, you know, that one of my strong things is being out in the community. You know, I love to be out in the community. I love to engage the people. I love to talk to the people. And it's something that I've been doing for the last 15 years, just out in the community, talking to people. My staff said, how do you do it every day? You know, you're out there now, you're also getting the community engaged. And I think this ordinance on a long term will be something that would be very helpful, because we normally have the community come down as council is getting ready to vote on stuff and say,
Right.
we didn't know anything about it. And then it's placed on hold and it holds it up. And so this gets the community involved in what's going on before council actually votes on it. So how important is it to you to ensure that we have a long-term plan for the community outreach?
Yeah, I think it is the right thing. And, you know, in the charter, of course, there's requirements that the mayor do 8 community meetings every year, 1 citywide and 1 in each council district. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to do the first one, and I'm going to hopefully master the process you have used with these meetings, because it's clear to me we're not going to have, before the end of the year, large groups of people packed into halls. And so we're going to have to do these community meetings, much like you're having to do your city council public meetings. And so, you know, I was talking to Senator Peters the other day, who was, you know, saying it's harder not being able to see people face to face, but he also finds he can do a lot more meetings because he's not having to drive 3 hours from one city to another. So there's upsides and downsides to this process. And I think you've shown us a way that maybe there are some upsides to it.
And I think, you know, it was so important to me as we come through, who would ever thought we'd be having meetings this way. But, you know, as we've seen what was happening with COVID-19, and I started talking about it much earlier, and, you know, my colleagues were saying they did not want to meet via technology. And my office, we started putting it together and working with Beth, who is an awesome IT person. We started working with her much sooner than we actually started this technology, and trying to get it together because I don't know, it's like we've seen this coming, to ensure that the public would still be able to see the meeting. We have an interpreter right now that's online with us. I thank God for our Creole department, who is setting up the interpreter services for us. And he's out there right now interpreting to those who need to have the interpreting services. I'm going to move on to our last topic because time is moving very rapidly. Our last topic is perhaps the most prevailing topic in the country right now. And there's still nationwide protests on racial injustice. As a former union president, I wholeheartedly, and not just as a former union president, as one who came from the South, was moved to Detroit in 1967 during the riot, I wholeheartedly believe in peaceful, law-abiding protests. I also support police reform that calls for new policies that root out bad officers and provide implicit bias training for officers. You know, we have one bad everything, one bad teacher, one bad doctor, one bad everything. And I believe prioritizing funds to provide social services, mental health care, and more policing can enhance public safety efforts. I was reading about a community that set up a system that past, when someone calls for a police, they check and they find out if it's something that can be dispatched out to someone who deals basically with mental health. And if it is, they dispatch the police and also the mental health person out as well. If it's something that needs social services, they dispatch that social service person out. And so you are a former prosecutor. What do you see as actions that can be taken to bring about police and criminal justice reform?
Well, I was the prosecutor in 2000 when the Detroit Police Department was shooting a higher percentage of our citizens, civilians, than any department in the country. We had one officer, you'll remember, who shot 9 different people, and the Detroit police cleared him on every single shooting. We had prisoners dying in precinct lockups, and the first thing I did as prosecutor was set up an independent review of every officer involved shooting and every jail cell death. The Justice Department stepped in and put the Detroit Police Department under a federal consent order that lasted until my first year here in 2014. And that process transformed the Detroit Police Department. The last 6 years or so were under President Obama's Justice Department. And so chokeholds were, for example, banned here in Detroit years ago. We completely changed the way use of force was done. And every time now there's a use of force incident, the officer has to write it up. It's reviewed by supervisors. The city of Detroit got out of the lockup business. We now take the prisoners to a state facility. We're not running lockups. A number of things have happened. And we have a police chief who you don't have to tell him about discrimination in a police department. When he started out as a Detroit police officer in a largely white force, when Mayor Coleman Young was committed to changing the makeup of the police department, I mean, he talks about his first weeks where the white senior officer who was driving the car told him, "Don't touch the buttons, don't talk." I mean, you have a young man who came up out of Detroit who saw the worst of discrimination from police officers and ultimately rose to be chief of the department. And so I completely supported it. We went to neighborhood police officers. Now we have 58 neighborhood police officers building relationships, not waiting till there's an incident, building the relationships ahead of time. Your questions on things like mental health. The Wayne County Mental Health Board has $600 million a year in a mental health budget. The Detroit Police Department is $300 million a year. We need to demand that we're getting $600 million in mental health services. The Detroit Police Department doesn't want to be the mental health agency, but you see the number of barricaded gunmen that they deal with, and they almost always get them out safely. In most cases, these are people with serious mental illness conditions that the mental health system didn't deal with. You look at Colin Rose, the young officer who was murdered from Wayne State. He walked up to a biker in what seemed to be an innocuous situation. The biker pulled out a gun, shot and killed him. Again, I think significant evidence of somebody mentally ill that was on the street. That same biker later shot 2 other officers before he was caught. So you think about the job of a Detroit police officer, not knowing whether your interaction is with a citizen who's got these serious underlying issues. And so, you know, I don't believe we need fewer police officers. I think we need more support from social services, more support from the mentally ill. I know there's some people who are talking about on a domestic violence case, if there hasn't been any physical violence, send out a social worker. I'm not sure how you do that until you get on the scene and you see what the situation is. I don't know a lot of social workers that are going to want to walk in to a domestic violence call without some kind of security presence. So those are conversations we're having. Chief Craig would very much like to be out of the mental health business. He'd very much like to be out of the counseling business. So these are conversations we need to have as a country, but we need to find the right balance. We just can't send social workers and mental health workers into potentially dangerous situations and pretend they don't have the potential to escalate, because they do.
And you know, it's just so important to say that, you know, I talked to the state before. My degree is in psychology. And so I know how important mental health is. And often people don't talk about mental health. They talk about physical health. They tell you I have high blood pressure, but yet they don't talk about the state of their mental health. And mental health is so important. You know, at one point, we were getting a lot of money in mental health. And so when I talked to the state during the last administration, they talked about money that they were putting into the jail system to go toward mental health when someone was sent to jail or something dealing with mental health. And I would say, I don't think we're getting our fair share from the federal government when it comes to dollars in mental health. And we need more money from the federal government for mental health, even not just dealing with the people who the police have to deal with, but also in dealing with our children, because we need to start off when our children need help also in mental health. So in your opinion, how important is it to ensure that there are Black people in leadership position? We talk about, you know, we have Chief Craig there now who is in leadership position. And one of the things that Ike McKinnon talked about for so many years is when he first got on the police department, his experience of someone using racial slurs to him, and then he became the chief, and he talked about how he was in the car with someone and they used racial slurs to him himself. And so, in your opinion, how important is it to ensure that there are Black people in leadership positions?
Well, you look at the Detroit Police Department, and of course, you got the first assistant chief, Lashinda Stair, the second assistant chief, James White, who are African American, and the majority of the leadership team is. And so I think that's important, but you've got to go farther than that. You have to get it into the culture. And I know Chief Craig was very disturbed about what happened in the 6th precinct a year or two ago. You had that terrible incident where the officers took the car of a young Black woman and had her walk home, and then videotaped it and posted as they ridiculed her in the process. But when the chief dug into it with what he called essentially a cultural audit, looked at it, we found that the second shift at the 6th precinct was overwhelmingly Caucasian on one shift, and that the problem wasn't just these two officers. There was a leadership issue. And it has really caused the chief to say, it isn't enough to have Black leadership at the top of the department. We have to have a culture that every shift in every unit is articulating the values of the department. And I think he's moved significantly in that direction. But I know how deeply he was hurt, as I was, and I think any person with any humanity was, to imagine that these officers could not just videotape this young woman, but then would post it and ridicule her. You say, how does somebody who has those attitudes continue to work in this department? And I know the chief and his leadership team are committed to rooting those kind of attitudes out.
And so, you know, I agree. And we have to rule out the racial problems that we have, just not in the police department, because we still have some that exist in the police department, but also just around the city of Detroit and throughout all of our departments. And so I am looking at leadership positions throughout the city, leadership throughout every department is something that's important to me. And so lastly, we know that social and racial equity coexist with economic equity. What are ways you feel that the administration can empower and support Black businesses?
Well, you just think about the whole issue of accumulation of Black wealth in this country. And for so many years, home ownership was discouraged by policies of the federal government, which means that Caucasian families who might have had some family wealth passed down in the home from generation to generation was not nearly as available in the Black community. Those kinds of savings can also be used to help people get starts in business. And when I was campaigning, I spent a lot of time with Black entrepreneurs. And it was just fascinating to me. The biggest issue they had was access to capital. They talk about the fact that the friends they knew who were white had family connections that could put together $10,000 or $20,000 to get out and start a business. And they didn't have that. And of course, that was the reason for Motor City Match, which has started, 100 businesses in this city, gave people a $50,000 start. The reason why I went to Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan Chase, and he put together the Entrepreneurs of Colors Fund, which has made $16 million in loans to Black and brown owned businesses in this city getting started. And we're now talking to a major bank about investments that are far beyond that. But we have an enormous number of talented entrepreneurs in this city that just need the same kind of financial opportunity that others have. And we've got to level that playing field. So we do it in a lot of different ways. We do it in ways like rebuilding the landscaping on Livernois so that now you raise the value of those storefronts. If we mix that with Motor City Match, with loan programs, we fill in the vacant houses in the neighborhood so there's more customers to patronize those stores. We have to do a whole lot of things. There's not going to be one answer, but we're seeing it work. We are seeing more and more African-American and Latino entrepreneurs opening businesses in this city. And we got to get past COVID because I thought we were really having some success there.
And I fight to make sure everyone is treated fairly and everyone have their fair shake at it. And I'm looking forward to the master plan of the city of Detroit and the things that we can do. I want to just thank you, Mayor Duggan, for being here with me today. Again, this is the first time we've had a one-on-one public conversation with the council president and the mayor. I want to see if we have any questions on Facebook. I want to see if there's any comments or questions from our audience. If you are our listening audience, you can press *9 if you are on the phone. And if you have any questions, if you are on Facebook and you have any questions, you can just put your questions there and we will see if we can get those questions answered for you. Do we have any questions from Facebook?
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, Mayor Duggan.
Morning.
We do have one question, and it is from Sandy Haggerty. She said, what if the resident lives in an area where there are no viable businesses to gain a hotspot? Where would they then get their internet connections from?
That's exactly the question that we have to answer. And it's been interesting as we have gone through the city. It's not just areas where there's not many people around. When Greenlight started, I was amazed at the number of businesses that could not get a Greenlight camera because there was no high-speed internet connection in that area. These are regular business strips. So you start to talk about folks who might be in neighborhoods where there might be only 5 or 6 houses left on a block. And it's going to take a lot of work, but that's really what Council President is talking about. I think you're going to see, we got a great team, a digital divide team in our IT department, but I think you're going to see Dan Gilbert really emerge as the champion of this. I think he's really taken this to heart. We will never have real opportunity in this city if everybody doesn't have internet access. It's where the world's going.
And funny she would ask that question, as I just talked about the master plan. And we look at rebuilding the city and being out talking to the community to see what the community would like to see in their communities. And Mayor Duggan knows himself that I think it was last summer, I came back and I said to you, Mayor Duggan, I said I was just in Toronto and the one thing I seen was cranes everywhere and they're building up the city. And I drive around and I see just even in my neighborhood, vacant land. And so we have to look at our master plan. We have to talk to the community to see what they want to see in their communities that will help them. And notice I said talk to the community and not talk at the community, because a lot of times people concentrate on talking at the community, but I think it's so important to get them engaged because it is their community and they know better than anybody knows what would be helpful in their community. And there's so much vacant land out here. And that's why I said it's more community space, it's more miles of community than there is of downtown and new center. And to be able to look at the master plan and redo the master plan is something that is so important to me. And it's funny that Facebook question would be there as I talked about the master plan. Do we have any other questions on Facebook or any other comments on Facebook?
Council President, we have one comment, and it is from Sharon Richards Trevelyan. She said, keep leveling the playing field for African Americans business in Detroit. God bless.
Well, she is an entrepreneur who has been highly successful in the trucking industry, which is not typically fertile ground for African American women, but she's just an example of one of the really talented people in the city that has succeeded in helping rebuild the city.
And she is, and you know, she started coming to my skilled trades task force that I started some 11 years ago and still have going. And she talked about trucking and how important trucking is. And she talked about how she was the African American company dealing with Ford Field and all of the other things. And we do have some great African Americans in the city of Detroit who's doing business in the city of Detroit. I think about my good friend Adrian Bennett, who was the first master plumber in the city of Detroit, in the United States, the first female. And she's an African American, and I knew her when she first started going to school to be a plumber and all of the problems that she faced. And now she has her own business that is doing business inside of the city of Detroit and has done business even with the People Mover. And so there are opportunities.
Her company put a lot of the plumbing in Little Caesars Arena. You know, she's another one who's just doing extremely well and is going to benefit from the continued growth in the city.
Yeah, and so I just know that there are a lot of opportunities that exist among in the city of Detroit for African Americans. And I see one hand raised. And so if we can go to the hand that's raised, and that's 516 is the last 3 digits of that phone number, 516. If we can unmute them so that they can ask their question.
516, you are unmuted.
Good morning. 516, good morning. It's the last 3 digits of your phone number, 516. Hello? Can you hear me? 516. You are unmuted, 516.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
And now?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay, I am wondering if I can find out if there are funds available for those that are interested in assisting young people that are aging out of foster care.
Yeah, that is the mental health system, and there's a great deal of money being spent. And if you'll call our office, we can get you linked up to them. It's not a city agency, but it's somebody we work closely with, and we could get you connected with them.
May I please have the number?
So the number here.
You call the mayor's office, or you
you call the mayor's office and tell them you just talked to me, and we will follow up.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to, do we have anybody else on Facebook before I ask my last question? Because the time is moving fast.
So the number here.
Yes, we do have a question. We do have one question on
call the mayor's
Facebook,
office and tell them you just talked to me, and we will follow up.
and it
Thank
is
you so
from
much, sir. I
Donald
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you
Lewis.
for your question.
Donald
Thank you.
Donald Lewis Jones.
I want to.
What would be the effect
Do we have
of a
anybody else on
police
Facebook
residency
before I ask my last
requirement?
question? Because the time is moving fast.
So the number
Yes, we do have a question.
we got some, I guess, some feedback, but I would fully support a residency requirement. When John Engler was governor, the state legislature passed a law that said no city could require its employees to live in that city as a condition of employment. So residency is not legal in the state of Michigan, or we would have it. We've done a number of things to try to encourage recruitment. Our current recruitment campaign, Answer Up to the Community, is intensely targeted in the city. We offer city employees the opportunity to buy houses out of the land bank at 50% discounts to try to get police officers, firefighters living in this city. And we offer to school teachers too, because I think we need to have more school teachers living in this city. I wish we could do it. We need to be honest. We got a Republican House and a Republican Senate in Lansing, and the governor's got her hands full. And so I completely support it. I'm not sure that it's going to be possible to get it through right now.
Okay. Thank you for that question. And, you know, I don't think a lot of people understand that that is something at the state level that needs to change at the state level. And so my question as we wrap up is, how will Dan Gilbert's IPO affect his impact on Detroit development and philanthropy?
So I've had a lot of conversations with them. I think it's going to be a positive thing for the city, but it's not my place to explain what their plans are and how it will be good. But from everything that I've been told so far, I think this is going to be positive, and I'm not going to step on Dan Gilbert's announcements. But I'm not concerned by what I'm saying. And if I don't know if you saw the story today, but the cranes are moving in now, and the Hudson's building will start to come out of the ground. Their projects are continuing to move forward. Full speed ahead. There's no, Dan Gilbert's not backing away from his commitment to the city of Detroit. In fact, I think you're going to see at his IPO, he's going to be even more intensely committed.
Okay, well, that is going to be wrapping us up for this hour that we have spent together on coffee, tea. I know you like diet. Is it Diet Pepsi or Diet Coke, Mayor Duggan?
Diet Coke, but I'm trying to cut down, so I haven't had one yet today.
Okay, so I always say it started off being coffee and conversations, but I say it, and I found myself drinking more tea, so I say it's coffee, tea, water, whatever your favorite beverage is, in conversation with Council President Jones. And today joining me was Mike Duggan as our special guest. I truly appreciate everyone on Facebook. I truly appreciate everyone on the phone who have been with us this morning. Was there anything you wanted to leave us with in closing remarks, Mayor Duggan?
No, Madam President, I'm very impressed with the efficiency of this operation. And when I try my first community meeting in 2 weeks, I hope it goes as smoothly as yours.
Okay, thank you again for joining us this morning, Mayor Duggan. And I asked everyone to please join me next Wednesday at 2 p.m. for Live from the Table. We will have an expanded edition featuring Detroit businesses doing Detroit work. Detroit contractors, the Office of Contracting and Procurement. We talk about Boise Jackson all the time, and Creo. We'll talk about how recurring services can mean recurring contracts for your businesses. As always, please follow me on social media or visit my city website at www.detroitmi.gov/CP Brenda Jones to be added to my email distribution list, where email Linda Wesley will email you back and will continue to email you. I call her Queen of the emails because she loves the email. I say to everyone, please wear your mask when you are out. Stay safe. Keep your family safe. Keep your loved ones safe. Keep yourself safe. Put on that mask as you're out. Sometimes I know it could be a little bothersome, but we want you to live. We want to see you and be able to talk to you and not stand over you as we are visiting you. Stay safe, Have a wonderful weekend, and this will conclude our coffee conversation, tea, or whatever your favorite beverage in conversation with Council President Jones for this morning. Again, thank you, Mayor Duggan. Thank you to our interpreter who has done an awesome job this morning. And thank you to all our listeners and our visitors on Facebook. We appreciate you and we look forward to seeing you. Again, have a wonderful weekend and God bless.
Thanks, Madam President.
Thank you.